Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Anderson with the Joseph Ryder Anderson Podcast, Episode 2. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that I haven't actually written about yet on the site, but something that I would like to talk about as I think it's relevant to a lot of people, especially those people who tend to read my site on a regular basis, or those who are new to TCGs. Anyways, this is going to be about the differences between the Pokemon TCG, Lorcana, and Union Arena. So those are the three TCGs that I'm currently covering, and they're all different, but also they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. So I'm going to be going over how the games compare, who they might be a good fit for, and even how the elements of playing the game compare. So let's first start with the Pokemon TCG. So that's obviously the biggest of the three, and there's a lot going for the Pokemon TCG. I think something interesting about the Pokemon TCG that probably does get mentioned a bit is that it's sort of equal parts player base, equal parts collectors base. In fact, the collectors may still outnumber the number of players, but unlike back in the olden times, before the pandemic and before TCGs grew as in general, as they have done in the 2020s, Pokemon TCG was largely not played. It was largely just collected. However, now the Pokemon TCG does have a massive player base. So there are huge regionals. There are several different online games for Pokemon TCG, like Pokemon TCG Live, Pokemon TCG Pocket. And yeah, there's a lot of people who play the Pokemon TCG. I think another really important thing to mention about the Pokemon TCG is that of the three games that I'm covering today, Pokemon TCG has the most robust competitive scene. So this game, that makes it perfect for people who want to play competitively. You have a huge amount of prizes to pursue competitively with Pokemon. You have regionals that dish out. I'm not current on what they are, but last time I checked, like, you could win $10,000 from getting first place at a regional. Worlds, I think you're competing for somewhere in the neighborhood of like $50,000 at the Masters level, right? So there is a huge prize and cash incentive for playing the Pokemon TCG. So that makes it a great and fantastic fit for the most competitive players out there. Of the three, by far, Pokemon TCG has the best fit for people who are really competitive, really want to chase the biggest possible prizes. I think another thing that's nice about the Pokemon TCG, however, is that it's so big that you can really find a place in it for just about anyone, right? So I mentioned it has a huge competitive scene, but you can also play casually, very easily and rewardingly, just on your phone or on your computer. You can play Pokemon TCG Live. That's actually probably my favorite way to play Pokemon, is because it's just such a fantastic, easy accessible. You can play whenever you want. There's always someone to play against. And grinding the ladder, I have grinded the ladder to Arceus before, and I'm probably gonna do that again soon, and is very rewarding. And you can there's even now like a ranking system, so you can see how well you're doing on Pokemon TCG Live once you get to Arceus compared to other people. You don't just stop at the Arceus League. So there's a huge player base. You can even play casually at League, right? Like if you just want to play with some friends and you like playing Pokemon, there's leagues everywhere, and most of them have players. As far as I've never had trouble finding a local scene where people want to play Pokemon locally. So I think a couple of the drawbacks of playing the Pokemon TCG. Another pro before getting to the drawbacks. I think a huge pro is that the Pokemon TCG is actually very affordable. It's definitely more affordable than Lorcana. Lorcana is probably the most expensive of the three I'm covering, but you can build competitive level decks for very affordably. I think there might be some decks that are over $100, but they don't go far over 100, and like most decks you can build for under 100. So again, those prices fluctuate, but it's definitely not a super expensive game. I think, as people I've talked to pointed out, once you get the staples for the Pokemon TCG, it goes down exponentially. I know when I first started playing Pokemon TCG during the pandemic, it felt like if I wanted to build multiple decks, it's like I had to spend like so much money, it felt like, just to build each different deck. But eventually you build up a strong base of cards so that when you need to build a new deck, you don't actually need to spend that much money on it. You're only spending whatever the cost of those new cards are, and those cards tend to go down pretty quickly after a set comes out. You just are patient, wait a little bit. And in the meantime, you have Pokemon TCG Live to test out strategies on. So yeah, so Pokemon TCG, fantastic. I think a con of the Pokemon TCG that I have with it that I think probably a lot of people do too is that there's not a huge support for the local scene. So that might sound funny because if you want to play competitively, it's hard to imagine a better game than the Pokemon TCG to play competitively. There's just so much competitive support. However, the competitive side of Pokemon TCG is gradually getting more and more difficult, right? Like it used to be, you had like a number that you had to reach to go to Worlds, whereas now only the top players are going to Worlds. It's much more competitive, and just not everybody has the resources. It's expensive to try to get a Worlds invite. I've heard estimates in like the 30K range of investment a year to try to chase a Worlds invite. It's just not something that people have the time or money to do. And the problem there is that there's not a ton of support for the local scene. So if you really just want to play casually and you just like playing fun and you want to get special prize packs, which some of those things that you get from there's exclusive packs you get from playing at League, and some of those cards can be valuable. However, there's not like smaller, more local focused tournaments to take part in. We can compare that with another TCG in a little bit. Or actually right now with another TCG, maybe moving on into the Union Arena. I think that's one thing that Union Arena is an anime card game put out by Bandai, and it's actually doing quite well from a sales standpoint, player-based standpoint. Union Arena has fantastic support for the local scene. I play primarily locally. That's my favorite way to play. And I also think that TCGs in general, the backbone of TCGs is local play. And actually, if you look at the number of the sales volumes, what drives the TCG market are not actually competitive players, it's casual players. That's where the bulk of the revenue comes from. So, we aspire to those competitive players. We look at their strategies. They're an important part of the community, but the bulk of it, the backbone of the TCG community is local. So Union Arena, moving on to Union Arena, it has the local focus. So the Union Arena has these really cool promotional events you can go to that are really motivating because you get to go, you get to play, and you get prizes that feel, even if they're not always valuable, some of them are, some of them aren't, it feels like you achieved something. It gives you something every week to try to go and chase a winner card at a tournament. And people really want to get that winner card. They want to complete their winner card set. And these winner cards change every couple of months. So it really gives you a really strong motivation to play locally. They even have these things called rare battles in Union Arena where it's a different format. So it's fun. It shakes things up. You're not always playing the same game. It's a vastly different format that you can go and chase more expensive cards in. So that's Union Arena is fantastic for a more middle of the road, especially if you want a reason and motivation to play locally. I think on the flip side of that is there is not really any. As of now, we've heard news that there's going to be a competitive like circuit and stuff, but the kind of bigger events that we have seen, like the large scale rare battle that's coming up soon, does not have fantastic pricing. There's not really enough there, I would say. If you're a hardened like competitive TCG player who really wants to go and search out those big prizes, there's not a lot there in Union Arena right now. So fantastic local support, not the greatest like competitive circuit. Now compare that to Lorcana from a competitive standpoint. Lorcana has a much bigger competitive scene than I would have thought it would have had starting out, because I sort of thought Lorcana would be sort of a bridge TCG, which I think it still in a lot of ways is, but it has a very robust competitive scene, and it's decent. Like the pricing that you get from that, it's not like anywhere near Pokemon levels, but it's decent. Like if you look at what Ed, he won the recent North American Championship and posted his prizes, and I'm sure he made in total value at least thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm not sure what the total value was, but he got tons of enchanteds. He got like that Black Star or Black Promo Mickey or whatever they call it in Lorcana, and he got just a lot of cool stuff. So there's definitely a strong incentive for competitive players who want to play Lorcana. And I think the cool thing about those bigger challenges that they do is I went to the one in Disneyland for the North American Championships, and they actually do have a decent number of like side events that are more casual focused. Like you can go and play Pack Rush, which is a very casual format. So that's something I've not noticed at Pokemon Regionals, that there's like stuff there for more casual like hobbyists. It's usually more just focused on the bigger competition. So that's sort of a middle ground there with Lorcana. I would say Lorcana is like the middle ground between the three, right? So Pokemon, you have your really high-end, competitively motivated stuff, as well as Room. If you want to play on live, you want to do you can do tournaments on Limitless. So that's a fantastic way if you like to play competitively, but you don't want to invest a ton in traveling around. You can play tournaments on Limitless as well. But Lorcana is a good middle road. If you want to play competitively or you want to have a little bit of fun, Lorcana is a great one for that. I think Lorcana does, from what I've noticed, I think Lorcana does not do a great job locally. It does have those set championships. It's probably that puts it above Pokemon in a way, from a local standpoint. You do have those set championships where you can win those promos. They bumped up the number of who can get the special, unique, exclusive promo to the top 8. So that's pretty cool. It definitely gives some local flair, but there's only about a month per set where you get to do that, as opposed to like Union Arena, you have this stuff going on all the time. So I think it's a good, again, sort of in the middle there from a local standpoint. I have not noticed there's not a ton of exclusive things that you get from playing Lorcana locally. You don't get like with Union Arena, you get exclusive tournament only action points or tournament only promos or tournament only winner cards. With Pokemon, you have the prize packs, which are pretty cool. You get some pretty cool exclusive prize pack cards with the special Pokemon stamp on it that you can only get at Pokemon League. So some of those can get pretty valuable. But Lorcana doesn't have anything like that, and I think if they did, it would be a little bit more motivating to play locally. All right, so from that, you should be able to tell a bit more of like the kinds of people or what kind of game might fit for you. Obviously, there's the question of IP, which is which IP do you relate most with. I'm not gonna go over that a lot because that's somewhat self-explanatory. If you love anime and that's really personal to you, then you might like Union Arena. If Pokemon has been a huge part of your life or childhood, Pokemon might be a really fun nostalgic thing for you to go and to play now, or maybe you just love it currently. If you're a big Disney fan, you love going to the Disney parks and you love being a part of the Disney scene, obviously Lorcana is a fantastic game for you from that standpoint, but pretty self-explanatory there. Moving on to the gameplay is actually pretty drastically different between these three games. So starting with Pokemon, I think what makes Pokemon also fun for competitive players is it's just a really high skill game. And that's funny because a lot of people who don't know Pokemon knock it for saying it's super easy, but it's actually not at all easy. It seems easy, right? At first, it's a pretty straightforward game at first, but in reality, because of the sheer amount of card search that goes on in that game, the way that you sequence things can have a drastic impact on how the game ends up. And out of the three games, sequencing matters the most in Pokemon, and it's the hardest to do. You have to be thinking about, and then beyond even sequencing, you have to be thinking about your whole deck, right? Because card search is such a big thing, because draw is such a big thing in Pokemon, your whole deck becomes like a resource, right? So it's not like in Lorcana, it's more about what's in your hand. Union Arena too, it's what's in your hand. You're not really thinking as much about what you're likely to draw. Whereas in Pokemon, you have to be kind of like counting the probabilities in your head of how likely you are to thin your deck out to reach this number of this particular card. And you have to be like, doing things like thinning out your deck, right? Like there's a lot of extra added steps in Pokemon that make it very challenging. And even just like trying to memorize your prize cards, right? Like people will spend tons of time at the beginning of a game, competitive players, just looking through what they don't have in their deck. I'm really bad at this. I usually just look to make sure that the damage isn't too bad, but a lot of people will actually go through and just figure out what's in the prizes. And that's, all very high skill things. And I think that also makes it very fun for competitive minded people, is because you can just sort of win a lot of times by being a more skilled player. There's the luck factor in some ways feels a little smaller in Pokemon. Now on the flip side, Pokemon can be very hard, right? Like sometimes when you're playing these decks and you're doing a million things in a single turn, it can start to feel a little bit like work, right? Because you have to do all these things, all these steps, and then it can be also a little bit like fatiguing. Like I would play a very challenging deck back in the day, where every little small choice had a huge impact on the game, and after I would do a 5-round event, my brain would just feel kind of fried because it was so much work. So if you like that, if you like a game where like being really high skilled is super impactful and all that, Pokemon's great. If you're really looking for just sort of a more fun game, I don't know. I'm not saying that Pokemon isn't fun, but it's intensive, right? So it might not be the greatest fit for everyone. So moving on into Lorcana. Lorcana is interesting. It's not, the card search isn't a big factor in Lorcana. In fact, cards that let you search your deck really don't do a lot. Like I won't get too much into that, but card search is not a huge deal in Lorcana, but card draw is. And I think that's something, Pokemon, it's a good mixture of things. You have, you're managing your sequencing, you're managing your resources. You can always draw more, so making sure you have cards in your hand isn't a big deal. Lorcana, it's harder to draw, so making sure that you're always drawing, you can win battles and games and matches by just making sure you're managing your resources, like making sure you're ramping or adding ink to your inkwell enough X number of times, or making sure you're outdrawing your opponent. It's a lot of resource management. More than anything else, I would say, is the key to success in Lorcana. So if you really like that, then Lorcana could be a really good game for you. I think another thing about Lorcana that is a pro and con is that it doesn't change a lot. The meta game does not change a lot per set. So there's more shifts. It's like subtle shifts. There's not like new decks added usually because of the way that the game's built. It's built around ink colors. So new cards come in, they impact existing decks. They don't bring in tons of new decks. So it ends up feeling sort of more like an added expansion to a base game, more than something that's constantly changing. Like Pokemon, I remember when I was starting out, it was a little overwhelming because I would go and build a deck that was at that point in time really good, and then a month later it would be completely unplayable because of the meta shifts. So Lorcana is more stable from that standpoint. So even though it costs more money, you're more likely to be able to play the deck that you get over time, as long as you just keep picking up cards. And at that point, if you're just buying singles, it's not super expensive to update your deck to the latest meta, the latest set. Now, moving on to Union Arena. I think that Union Arena currently actually has the most fun gameplay mechanics of the three games. And it's still really early, so the Union Arena hasn't even been out a year. So hopefully it keeps that up, keeps a good balance. But Union Arena, unlike Lorcana, where which ink color you play is going to drastically impact how you play the game, Union Arena has a very balanced set of effects and cards that are somewhat available to all of the different energies. Colors is what they call them. And I think what happens, there are some subtle differences. Each energy color has its unique flavor, but the game ends up feeling very balanced. Like you're playing the same game. The two of you are playing the same game with just different tools, if that makes sense. Whereas in a game like Lorcana, it feels almost like you're playing two completely different games based on what deck you're playing. I think too, one thing that keeps Union Arena super well balanced from a gameplay standpoint is that you are limited to only 3 action point cards that you can use per turn. So one thing I really like, because I have ADHD, is that turns are pretty fast and games are pretty fast in Union Arena, and tournaments are fast too, because Bandai typically does 1 rounds, so best of ones. So it ends up being a much faster paced game. I think that you compare that to Pokemon. When I play Pokemon, I play pretty quickly, but a lot of times I'll play against people who don't play super quickly. And so, you'll get through a turn, and it does take a while. Even if you're playing quickly, it just takes a while to shuffle and all this stuff. But then you just sit there and you just wait for your opponent to do a million things. And it kind of starts to feel a little bit like solitaire, right? And sometimes Lorcana can feel that way too. I think in Pokemon, and also in Pokemon, games only go a couple turns. So turns are really long and they only go a couple turns. Union Arena, there's a lot of back and forth, tons of back and forth, because it's you can only do a couple things per turn, and there's not a ton of cards that extend that yet, and hopefully that doesn't happen. I think it's just that keeps it very balanced. There's a lot of balancing issues in Lorcana. I think that they try to address, like, sometimes something comes out and it's just too powerful. But I think, like, right now there's one deck that's been dominant for a couple sets now. And it's just hard. It's hard to really compete with it because it gives you added ink into your inkwell, and so it makes it so you end up just having a ton of choices, whereas most other decks will just not have as many choices. So I think Union Arena is the most balanced of the 3 games right now. The only thing that I think that probably some serious players might have a problem with Union Arena is that there is a definite luck factor. Every TCG has a luck factor. You can't get rid of that, and you have to plan. Part of being successful is, like, assessing that luck, assessing that probability. But Union Arena does have a lot of some luck, some added luck in it because of the way that their life system works. So they have like a prize system, kind of like Pokemon, where Pokemon you have 6 prize cards, and every time you knock out a Pokemon, you get a prize card. Whereas Union Arena kind of works the opposite, where you have 7 prize cards. They're called life, and they actually help you. So instead of helping the person who's winning, they help the person who's taking the hit. So you actually rely on those triggers as on the defensive side to help you, and how good those triggers are have a massive impact on the game. Pokemon, it's sort of on the minority side that what's in your prizes has like a drastic impact on your game. It does happen. You might prize a really necessary card, but for the most part, your prizes are not as big of a deal, and then they help whoever is winning to keep winning, right? So it sort of builds on that momentum, whereas a trigger effect can completely derail you. If you can attack, you can get your best attacker wiped out and give your opponent the advantage. So the trigger system, it actually is partly what makes Union Arena so fun, because you never know what's going to happen, but it also does add a little bit of extra luck into it. So I think some super seasoned TCG players might prefer a game like Pokemon, where there is a little bit less of a dramatic luck factor involved. So with that being said, that's sort of my comparison of the 3 games right now. I think one more thing to add, since I mentioned like the collectability, Pokemon right now is going through another surge in collectability where cards are worth a lot. We saw that with Prismatic Evolutions, where you can't even get Prismatic Evolutions because those cards are so valuable. Union Arena is surprisingly valuable. So I wrote an article about comparing Union Arena and Pokemon, where people are freaking out because you can get a $1,600 card from Pokemon, whereas I flipped a card I got from a brand new Union Arena set for over $1,600, or $1,600, sorry. And again, like, there's a lot of valuable cards that are fun to chase in Union Arena. There's multiple rarities, kind of like in Pokemon. So Union Arena is a very collectible, fun to collect game, just like Pokemon. I think Lorcana, I think the collectors are probably in the minority. And if you're a collector, go ahead and tell me that I'm wrong about that. But I don't see a huge market for the collector side, and there's a lot of room for growth with the collectability of cards, because for the most part, Disney Lorcana cards come in one version, and then they have one alternate version, a couple of those per set, and of those, really just the characters are the ones that are valuable, that people want to get. So Lorcana, for a Disney game, usually Disney stuff is highly collectible. Lorcana is not as collectible as you might think. So yeah, rundown of that, probably how they stack up would be, number 1 would be Pokemon, and number 2 would be Union Arena, number 3 would be Lorcana in terms of collectability. So hope that helps you figure out what game you want to get into. Check out my website, josephryderanderson.com, for more info on what's going on with these games, and I'll talk to you next time.